Hey there everybody, welcome to Tucktuk's Trinkets and Terrain. My name is David, and for this week's video I created a random monster using the random esoteric creature generator. This is a book from Goodman Games. It's super cool. It basically is a bunch of tables with a bunch of random parts and features that you can use to create interesting and unique monsters. I like to use it a lot to throw unique and different creatures into my Dungeons & Dragons games to sort of step away from the traditional, monster manual monsters. But for this video, I ended up with this crab adjacent creature. Super cool and interesting looking. So I'm gonna show you what I did and how I did it, and I hope you enjoy. So this is the creature generator book from Goodman Games by James Edward Raggy IV. It's a super great resource, like I said. Unfortunately, it is no longer in print, or at least I couldn't find any sort of current development of it, but you can get PDFs of it on their website, which I will link in the description below if you want to check it out. But basically the book is broken down into a bunch of tables that determine the creature that you're creating's sort of body shape, its generic features, specific features, and then even like special powers and abilities it has. And that talks about how to use those creatures and sort of turn the stat block into something that you can use for whatever game you play. As for what I rolled for my creature, I got the basic body shape of a quadruped with features of a crustacean, specifically the clam. Its attack type is spikes and horns. And then for general features, I got wings, eye stalks, unusual color, red, distinctive marking spots, and then tentacles. This is where I stopped. It does go into more detail how you can just keep rolling features if you really wanted, but I figured this was a great mix. It felt sort of cohesive. I did end up rolling for its powers and abilities because I figured that would not affect its appearance at all. But to start things off, I went through my collection of shells, which is pretty low right now. I was hoping for a pair that matched, but I didn't end up finding any, so I just went with one shell. Ends up giving the creature more of a crab shape rather than a clam, but it's still crustacean, and this was what I had on hand. I bulked out the inside of the body with some aluminum foil and clay, and then I set about making all of the different features. I mainly use green stuff for this because green stuff is great for sort of long, thin bits. It's very sturdy and doesn't snap very easily, so that's what I went with. For the tentacles, I just rolled out a piece of green stuff and then gave it a bit of texture with the tool here, put it into an interesting pose, and then set that aside. I ended up making 2 of those. For the eye stalks and the eyes, I took a small round wooden bead and basically just shaped some green stuff around it. I did end up adding a bit more than what you see here to give it more of eyelids. And then for its attack, it's its spikes and horns. I actually took some inspiration from the flail snail, which is a Dungeons & Dragons monster that has these pseudopods that end in sort of a mace-like appearance that it uses to smash its prey. So I'm going to make a couple more tentacles and then create sort of a knob at the end of it. Set that aside to dry, and then once it's dry, I just push down some very small pieces of green stuff to make all of the individual spikes for the sort of method of attack of our creature here. Again, I made 2 of these and set these aside to dry. I then set about making the wings, and I moved away from green stuff for these since they were going to be quite large. I didn't want to use a bunch of green stuff since it is moderately expensive. So I ended up using hot glue. And so to do this, I have this sheet of sort of hard plastic from some packaging. And using my main body as a reference, I traced out just a general shape and then used hot glue to form the wing itself. The idea here being that I can create the wing using hot glue and then peel it off of the plastic once it's all dry and cured. Added a bit more detail on the inside, and then when I attempted to peel it off of this plastic, the bond ended up being a lot stronger than anticipated, so it ended up tearing and just not really working. So I took what I had, salvaged it, and ended up gluing to a piece of parchment paper. And once that was cured, I flipped it over and I cut a couple pieces of floral wire and then used some hot glue to embed it into the wing itself, and then finished up this side of the wing to double the thickness, make it a bit sturdier, as well as give detail to both sides of the wing. And then once everything was cured, it was simply a matter of cutting it out of the paper. No need to peel it off or anything. This also gave the opportunity to trim any excess glue, make the edges a little bit smoother, a little cleaner. And with the wire in there, it lets me shape these wings into a pose that I like, and it holds it fairly well. Some thicker wire probably would have been better, but the 4 wire is what I had on hand, and it works just fine. So next up for the sort of legs, I wanted to keep the tentacle theme going, so using a bit of this thicker copper wire to give the legs some strength and some sturdiness. I just shaped some green stuff around it and then gave it an interesting shape. Made 4 of these for the creature to rest on to make sure we get the quadrupedal feature that we rolled. And then once all the components were hardened, I started to glue them into the body. I used some hot glue to start just to hold them in place. This wasn't by no means permanent. This was basically just to set everything where I needed it to be, to secure them further in a little bit. You can see I also added a couple smaller tentacles to the back with some leftover green stuff that I had. And then to secure everything into place, I rolled out some more green stuff and then just essentially pushed it into all the crevices in between all the pieces to not only bond everything really well once it hardened, but then make everything cohesive and look like one single body instead of a bunch of pieces stuck together. Then I let that harden for 24 hours, make sure everything was secure, and set about painting. So for the bottom here with the exposed clay, I did give it a nice thick layer of some black paint and Mod Podge just to give it a little more durability, since the clay does have a tendency to break. But everything else I just gave a nice coat of some black spray primer. For the body, I mixed up this sort of fleshy pinky tan color. When I think of a clam, it has that sort of off-white flesh, and that's kind of what I was going for here. And then once everything was dry, I used some Reichland Flesh Shade GW wash to give it some shadows and some variation in the color. While I was doing this, I made sure to dip my brush in some water pretty frequently to make the wash pretty thin. I didn't want it to darken the color that I had mixed up. And then for the shell itself, this is where our distinctive color and unusual pattern come into play. I base coated the shell in this dark red, and then while that was still wet, I took a bright red and made some spots around the edge of the shell. I then painted the eyes just a flat black. Once the shell colors were, I hit it with some more Reichland Flesh Shade wash to really keep that red color. And then while that was drying, I covered all of the flesh with some glossy Mod Podge to make everything really sort of wet looking. This is a sea creature, so I wanted to help get that across with making everything sort of slimy and just wet looking. And then one final dry brush with a bright red over the shell to bring back all the natural texture in it. And it is all done. Super simple paint job, but I really like how it turned out. I imagine this creature hides in its shell, underneath the sand, and then erupts, forming all of these appendages to hunt whatever it eats. I really enjoy making these random monsters. It lets me be really creative and not be bound by any sort of rules or standards, except for the ones that I set for myself. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe for future videos. I post them every other Friday, so keep an eye out for those. I also have an Instagram account where I post in-progress pictures and other things that I've got going on. I also have an Etsy shop where you can pick up dungeon tiles and accessories for your tabletop games, as well as other sort of gifts and decor items. Both those links can be found in the description below. More than anything, thank you so much for stopping by. We'll see you next time.